Hello and welcome. My name is Alan, and I promised we would be doing some more books, and so we are beginning on the Ideas and Opinions of Albert Einstein, as it was one I guaranteed. Bushido, we're almost done with. If I cram it together, I can probably make one video about 20 to 30 minutes in length. It's literally, there's not much left to it. So we'll be ending it pretty soon. And of course, we've got the MLK's speeches up there. But let's go ahead and hop into this, the ideas and opinions. Albert Einstein. First part we're going to begin with is a section called Paradise Lost. Written shortly after the establishment in 1919 of the League of Nations and first published in French. Also published in Mein Weltbild, Amsterdam, Querido Verlag, 1934. So, there's kind of the background. We'll talk a little bit more when I finish here. It's just three little short paragraphs. As late as the 17th century, the savants and artists of all Europe were so closely united by the bond of a common idea that cooperation between them was scarcely affected by political events. This unity was further strengthened by the general use of the Latin languages. Today, we look back at this state of affairs as a lost paradise. The passions of nationalism have destroyed this community or community of the intellect and the Latin language, which once united the whole world, is dead. The men of learning have become representatives of the most extreme national traditions and lost their sense of an intellectual commonwealth. Nowadays, we are all faced with the dismaying fact that the politicians, the practical men of affairs, have become the exponents of international ideas. It is they who have created the League of Nations. So, um, Einstein begins with this by noting as late as the 17th century, the 1600s, the savants and artists of all Europe were closely united by the bond of a common idea that cooperation between them was scarcely affected by political events, meaning that no matter what's going on, they should still be able to cooperate with one another. This unity was further strengthened by the general use of the Latin language, which, of course, Latin, the tongue of the Roman Empire, which at its heights ruled most of Europe. It stretched into the British Isles, um, parts of the Iberian Peninsula, um, Gaul, which is modern day France, Germany, and parts of Eastern Europe. So Latin spread pretty well throughout Europe, and everybody using Latin, it was something they could all circle around. Today we look back at this state of affairs as at a lost paradise. So he's talking about looking back at this idea they had in the 1600s that they could still come together no matter what through some means, no matter the politics. They all could at least speak Latin, to communicate. The passions of nationalism have destroyed this community of the intellect, and the Latin language, which once united the whole world, is dead. Okay, so the passions of nationalism, which is of course, you know, extreme in patriotism, in that it is our nation, you love it or leave it type of attitude. There's a lot of dangerous nationalism in the U.S. right now. But, yeah. And that kind of nationalism, Einstein says, destroyed the community, that community of intellect, of intelligence. Because he says at the beginning, it's um, the savants and artists of Europe. Okay. And it also destroys the Latin language, which, um, as he was saying at one point, united many of Europe's nations through the ability to understand that language, where it was once spread throughout. But in the early 1900s, it's not nearly in as heavy use as it once was, especially with the nationalism says speak, whatever their native tongue is. Here in the US, it's like the people that go, speak English, that's the only thing that's good here. So, yeah. The men of learning have become representatives of the most extreme national traditions and lost their sense of an intellectual commonwealth. So, even those of an intelligent level have lost the idea of working together with with people of intellect from other countries to really improve the world overall. And instead have kind of become part of this nationalistic fervor. Nowadays, we are faced with the dismaying fact that the politicians, the practical men of affairs, have become the exponents of international ideas. So, those who are literally guided by the politics of their country have sort of by default become representatives of the international community. See, in the beginning, Einstein quotes, it's the local politics wouldn't always have an effect on such a thing. It is they who have created the League of Nations. So he's citing that it is only these men of politics who have put together the League of Nations. And the idea is good, but it's not always accepted. The idea of the League of Nations was the United Nations before there was a United Nations. You see, after World War One, which ended in 1918, that talks about the formation of the League of Nations in 1919, and that's Einstein. That those three paragraphs are a piece Einstein wrote on it. He says, even though we could come together as a whole, especially within Europe, because there is still so much that bonds us together. Our politics keep us apart. The League of Nations only came together because it became something that we felt was necessary. But these men who helped push its formation were still trying to cling to their political ideologies and ambitions. So even though the League of Nations was formed and it was a good idea, it only became one that they agreed to out of necessity. It wasn't one that they was like, it'd be a good idea to work together to think of things, to become a global community. Instead, no, we saw many nations unwilling to sign. It would be many years before the U.S. even ratified the League of Nations, approved it to be a member. Unfortunately, the League of Nations itself would fall apart before the outbreak of the Second World War in 1940, 41, something like that. It was late 1940, early 1941 when World War II began, but yeah, a little over 20 years. The League of Nations was born and fell apart. Now, like I said, after World War II, they retried it, but with corrections, and it became known as the United Nations. An attempt to hold peace internationally. But yeah, that's the first thing in that book, The Ideas and Opinions of Albert Einstein. In the next episode, we will get a little further in. But as always, educate thyself, think, read, study, learn. Someone tries to tell you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. I'll see you all in the next episode, but until then, later.